Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and this is normally, this is the podcast where we talk about G.I. Joe all day, right? We've covered all the old episodes of the cartoon, Sunbow, DIC, Extreme. We've covered every single issue of the G.I. Joe Marvel Real American Hero comic book, all that stuff. Just finished Action Force. I hope everyone enjoyed that. But I say usually because today we've got a little bit of a diversion. There is a Larry Hama connection, but I was approached to do an interview about a book that absolutely speaks to me and sings to my heart. The book is called Crazy, the Magazine That Dared to Be Dumb. It is written, co-authored by Marks, Slade, and Arnold. Mark Arnold and Mark Slade. And this is a comprehensive look at the Marvel humor magazine from the 1970s through the early 80s called Crazy. Some of you may or may not be familiar with it. But Larry Hama, who we absolutely all are very familiar with, he was the editor in the final years of Crazy. I believe 4 years, if I remember from reading the galleys of the book. So I think there's absolutely a connection here. I think this is a book that you guys should check out if you love Marvel Comics, especially Bronze Age Marvel Comics. There's a lot here. A lot of massive, massive creators of the era worked on Crazy. So we're going to get into it with this conversation with the two Marks. Real pleasure talking to them. You can find their work at bearmanormedia.com, B-E-A-R, manormedia.com. That's the best place to find and purchase this tome. They've also worked on some other books from Screaming Eye Press. And there's a Marvel Bronze Age interview book that recently came out from Mark Slade that's just chock full of interviews with the Bronze Age creators from Marvel Comics. And that's an era that speaks. If you're listening to this show, I'm assuming that's an era that speaks to your heart. And if it's not, then you just obviously you haven't read enough of Bronze Age Marvel, because that stuff's the bee's knees. You know who else is the bee's knees? Our sponsors, the Movies in a Meal podcast. They're absolutely fabulous. As I'm recording this, it's middle December. There's Kraven the Hunter is out in the theaters. It has been out for 2 days, and I've been able to avoid it for 2 days. I probably won't be able to avoid it for another day. I don't think it doesn't look very good, but here's what I can guarantee you. I guarantee you our friends at Movies in a Meal podcast checked it out, and they probably had some good opinions. So I'm going to see it and then tune in and listen to how they skewered that movie, because I have zero hopes for the quality of Kraven the Hunter. But check out our friends at the Movies in a Meal podcast. They're really, really fantastic, and they help support this show. You can help support the show by saying hi. You can say hi on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Joe and Joe Pod. Send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. We've got a Patreon, patreon.com/Joe and Joe Pod. And just be part of the community and say hello, and leave a review in your podcatcher and all that good stuff. But most of all, I want you to at least check out Crazy, the Magazine That Dared to Be Dumb, the book. It's great. I loved this interview. It's so much fun. These two dudes are very nice to talk to. They got a million stories, and all of a sudden I looked at the clock and I'm like, okay, we've been talking for a long time. We need to wrap this up, but there's a million stories. They've been interviewing everyone about this. So check it out. I know you're going to enjoy this interview. And here we go with, some conversation about Crazy, the magazine that dared to be dumb. I love Marvel comics. I love Marvel Bronze Age comics, and the 70s Marvel era is so fascinating to me. It's when I was born, but I wasn't into, comics. I was 5 in 1980. And when you look back, you see them experimenting with so many different formats. And obviously one of them here, we're talking about Crazy. And Mark Arnold, what was it about Crazy that made you want to investigate and kind of chronicle the history of that magazine?
Well, it wasn't the first one I dove into. I was a comic book fan probably since birth, but that Bronze Age era, since I'm probably a decade older than you, is like 70 to 80 is like my key area. It's like, yes. So anything that came out, I discovered Mad around 1974. and cracked about mid 75, and then late 75 is when I saw Crazy, and they had one of those a standalone Crazy super special, which we talk about in the book. So it had like their best material from the early years, and it's like I'm just like, wow, this is incredible. And then I found the latest issue and started buying them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was always into the humor magazines. I was always into the offbeat stuff. Certainly read my share of superheroes and everything else, but to this day, the humor stuff, especially that mad, crack, crazy, sick, you know, help, humbug, whatever, all
There were
those
so many.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, snafus, and stuff like that. All that stuff I just adore. It's like I always think that we need more of it, and unfortunately, Mad is like the only sole survivor now, barely.
Right.
They do have some new material in the latest issue, but still, it's like I've always kind of wished Crazy lasted longer, but it was perfect for its time. It was that was perfect for my age and just everything about it. I just thought it was funnier than Mad. I didn't think the artwork was as good, but it had kind of a more subversive quality than Mad, and so I kept reading Mad and Crazy more than I'd stopped Cracked for a while because I got bored with it. I thought the artwork was good, but the humor was. Yeah. So Mad and Crazy were my go-tos for the late 70s, early 80s.
I'm going to put a pin in the artwork part because that is one of the topics I want to discuss about this because it was revolutionary when I was reading about some of the artists that worked on Crazy. Mark Slade, similar love for for Cracked, Marvel, Mad, or is that what brought you to want to dig into the history of Crazy?
Well, my brother Doug collected them. He collected almost always almost always Marvel. And he drilled it in my head that Marvel was better than DC. Yet he collected some of the DC, like Batman and Green Lantern and stuff like that. Never Superman, hated Superman. But when I was younger, probably my first comic book was Ghost Riders. I've told Mark before. And I was probably 6 or so.
Is that because you shared a last name with the original Ghost Rider?
I don't know. I doubt that. It's more that I saw it in a grocery store and I had to have
a
it.
flaming head skull on a motorcycle in the mid 70s. I'm in.
Who could resist?
Yeah, the only thing better is if he had a flaming conversion van with warriors painted on the side.
So I got to read. I got that, and of course I had nightmares looking through it. So I probably wasn't that great at reading yet. And then my mom said I couldn't read it anymore, and of course you know how that went.
Sure.
And then he also collected Savage Sword of Conan. And how I found out about Crazy is through the advertisements. You go through, and besides seeing the naked bodies and all the violence in Conan.
Came for the violence and you stuck around for the crazy.
Yeah, pretty much. And I don't know if he may have bought 1 or 2 issues. I don't remember seeing it, but a few years later, as I've said to Mark before, I think I was about 10, maybe 9. And I didn't know that this was probably the last issue or next to the last issue. And I got the issue that had reprinted the Casper the Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
And it also had a parody of the Smurfs. And it had Papa Smurf, for splash page, he's looking at porn.
Was it really?
You turn the page and you see how, all the Smurfs, and find out Vanity Smurf finds out he has no genitals and he's upset, but he loves to comb his hair and he has no hair, but it's things like that. And like Mark said, it's very subversive. It always was. And the Casper, the Dead Ghost, I think is what Marvel has been called.
I think you're right. Yeah.
It was reprinted from issue 8, and that issue also issue 8 had Police Gory Story, which it may have been reprinted in that last issue. And that was a takeoff on Police Story TV show, which I remember vividly watching, or at least parts of it. And it was just so funny. And so was Casper. But, at the time I didn't understand why would they do that to to Casper. I love Casper. And as more and more I read it, it was just so funny.
Yeah.
And the way he got his revenge on his abusive father was even funnier.
Right, because
So,
someone killed that young boy. Someone made that
yes,
ghost. That's the darkest cartoon of all time. Someone
yes,
made that ghost, and we need
yeah,
to know who. That's great, and it very much touches on the things that we talk about here on Joe and Joe, where it's the thing you were into when you were 10. You know,
yeah,
it's all that 10 to 12 ish era. There's something in there, and it may not be something that you follow through as a collection or as a career, you know, in your cases, but there's still something in that in every almost everyone we've talked to. There's something in their heart. There's something in their brain that still connects to that thing, and they still have these fond memories of that age. So
yeah.
that's really cool to see. So Crazy is very much like Mad Magazine. I didn't realize it ran as long as it did. I was familiar with that. I don't have any issues of Crazy in my collection. I've got a lot of comics. I don't have any issues of Crazy in my collection. I did not realize it ran as long as it did. It's
Yeah.
your description in the book of it being like, or maybe it was Marv Wolfman talking about it, where they wanted it to be like Mad, but they also really wanted a National Lampoon's edge to it.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
So spot on. In the little bit that I've read of it through your book, which by the way, listeners, is called Crazy, the Magazine That Dared to Be Dumb. It's fantastic. It's a compilation of interviews and like kind of issue by issue breakdowns. You know, roughly.
Yeah.
I don't think you guys do it like every single issue, do you?
No.
No, that would
Yeah,
be
that
too
would be
difficult.
huge. Yeah, it's a nice thick book
94
though.
issues.
Yeah, it's a nice
And there,
thick book, but it's era by era, really
Yeah.
breaking it down, kind of giving you a great vibe of what's in these books that I know I don't have any. A lot of people really have never seen them. So you're doing the good work in bringing this stuff to us. The National Lampoon versus Mad thing. How do you guys differentiate that? Mark Arnold, we'll say two marks, so
well,
many marks.
um,
Like if
National,
when you're describing, when you're thinking about it, what's the
yeah.
differences between those two takes?
Well, National Lampoon pulled no punches. I mean, we're talking before we went on. We could try to keep this a family-friendly, clean show. National Lampoon did everything, but it's like they dropped the F-bomb. They had nudity. They would do everything. So it's like, and I did buy that too along the line there. And then I had to stop because somewhere along the line they decided to say instead of just the humor magazine, they put the humor magazine for adults. And those two words said, "Hey boy, you're only like 12, you're only like 13, you can't buy this." And so I had to stop for a few years, and then I started buying it again, and I went back and got the issues I got there or missed there. But um as far as the humor goes, I think that this kind of hits the nail on the head here. Is in 1971, National Lampoon did a Mad parody, and it really skewered how Mad had become very formulaic by 1971.
Mm-hmm.
Al Feldstein had been the editor for 20 years almost, and yeah, it was still funny, but some could argue it was almost just like Mad by numbers, and that it's
Yeah.
so formulaic. You had your lighter side, you had your spy versus spy, you had your fold in, everything was established. And so that's kind of what Lampoon was kind of parodying, and they were the new young upstart. And so when Crazy came along to kind of tie it into this book, Marv Wolfman was the one who wanted it more like Lampoon because that was the young upstart, and Stan Lee wanted it more like Mad. But Stan Lee grew up with the early Mad and did Snafu, which is a failed attempt to do like a Mad thing. And even earlier, they did a Crazy magazine comic book at the time Mad was a comic
Mm-hmm.
book. So, Stan Lee wanted to keep that kind of same family friendly, fun, whatever that Mad was doing and get that, whereas Marv wanted to be a little more experimental. So Crazy kind of comes off as a hybrid of those two. It didn't get so dirty, that they're having nudity, although they did a feature once on streaking.
In
And, but they
Crazy,
didn't, yes, they didn't show anything, they covered up the areas, but still.
it
And they
was
did
just Quicksilver naked as a blur on every other page.
and they did a parody of features that ran in National Lampoon, like they had photo funkies instead of photo funnies,
Mm-hmm.
and it had uh, um, Roy Thomas and his wife playing the actors, and
Yes,
his wife took
and
off her
Steve
shirt.
Englehart.
Yeah, and Steve
And
Englehart. Yeah,
So
and
great.
Roy's wife at the time did the nude girl, but she covered herself, and
Yeah,
or she
yeah.
pull off her shirt, and there was another shirt underneath. Things like that, just to tease the audience a little bit. But that was kind of lampoonish because it was making fun of that style and kind of doing that style at the
Hmm.
same time. So
And these names you're saying are legends in the comic industry, and
yeah,
I would venture to say none of us associate them with Mad Magazine style comedy and or humor. Marv
no,
Wolfman, Roy Thomas, Neil Adams. Earlier you were talking about art. I wanted to put a pin in that.
yeah.
Neil Adams does the artwork on some of this
Well,
stuff.
I'll defend myself on the art thing. When I started reading it, and this is why Mark and I, and Mark especially, Mark Slade, went through the first 14 issues. Those are the ones edited by either Marv Wolfman or later Steve Gerber, and those had the incredible artists you're talking about, the Neil Adams,
Mm-hmm.
the Will Eisner, and all those things.
Yeah.
By the time I started reading it, they were all kind of going away, and they had this guy named Paul Lake, and you just kept it running for a few years. And he brought in he had like these group of artists that he just went everywhere with, and some were good, like Ray Billingsley, or Vic Martine was one, or some were just kind of so, like Tony Tallarico. I hate to say if you're a Tallarico fan out there, but I always found his stuff to be kind of,
I know
and
that. I know that name.
yeah,
What do I?
yeah.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of stuff. He did stuff for Dell,
Yeah.
like the Dell Frankenstein and Dracula
Okay.
during the
Yeah, I
60s, that
totally
type of
know that
stuff.
name. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He did the first black superhero called Lobo. He
That's
took credit
totally
for
why
that.
I know
Yeah,
that name.
yeah.
Yep, yep.
Not the DC Lobo, a
No,
different
no,
one.
no. I
Yeah.
remember. I remember
But
reading about
but
Lobo in an issue
so
of Back Issue magazine.
that that's where the bad artist tag, and they still had some good artists, but when Larry Hama took over, then he started bringing the good artists back, and
right.
and so, but there was a time where it was kind of like, this is how crazy ended up for 94 issues. They kind of kept it floating for about
Yeah.
3 or 4 years, and it was funny, but just the art was kind of during that
Hmm.
period, so
That's why. Well, Larry comes from that Wally Wood, Krusty Bunkers adjacent,
Right.
background.
right,
Also from a strong editorial hand.
yeah.
So when he takes something over like that, the quality is going to jump up.
And
And
Larry was there in the early days. He wasn't an editor. He just wrote a couple pieces.
uh-huh.
So he knew what went on at the beginning too. And he says, let's bring it back to that. And he succeeded for about 3 or 4 years until, the early 80s, where things kind of shifted to the direct market, and,
Yeah.
anything that was not superhero kind of fell by the wayside. That was the
Hmm.
end of Harvey. That was the end of Gold Key. That was the end of Charlton. That was the end of Dennis the Menace, all that stuff.
And the
So,
end of Crazy overlaps the beginning of G.I. Joe, right? By like a year or so? Doesn't Crazy go like to
something
83
like
and G.I.
that.
Joe
So
was like
yeah,
82? Yeah.
and Larry was getting more interested in that. That became very successful, and so Larry was happy to say adios, Crazy,
Yeah.
because he had another gig that was going to be continuing, and did for, like, I don't know, 150 issues or something.
Oh, G.I. Joe, yeah,
Yeah,
155 for sure. Yeah.
yeah,
And I mean,
something.
and obviously even further, that becomes a career defining move for him. I
Yeah.
was impressed to see that Jim Owsley / Priest was involved in Crazy. I'm a huge fan
Oh
of
yeah.
his work, man.
He was assistant editor.
Yeah,
Yep.
that was great. I forget, in the book, do you have an interview with him?
No.
No.
No,
Oh,
we couldn't get a hold of him.
he's
And
elusive.
about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I got an email from him saying that he would love to help any way he can, but he
Oh,
didn't see my emails,
yeah,
which did he or did he not? Well, I mean, I don't care if he did, but I
sure.
let him know that we'd appreciate any help.
Yeah, he's
So,
he's one, super talented, and two, I
yeah,
believe he dropped out of creating comics for like a decade or something, and it's
right.
only been like in the last 8 years or so that he's come back. I had a chance to finally meet him after never
Oh,
meeting him because he was off the scene for a bit. Couldn't be nicer.
right.
I was very effusive in my praise of his work because I absolutely adore his stuff. So seeing that he was a part of Crazy made me smile, and then it made me know that there's going to be some really solid stuff in there. Mark Slade, what's your like favorite not stance, but like favorite style of comedy that Crazy employed? because what I see is there's a lot of parodies,
Yeah.
of
I know.
pop culture at the time stuff, and then there's a little bit of original kind of content, like this, for example, like a spy versus spy mad kind of content, where it's their thing, and they had
Definitely
Obnoxio the clown and stuff like that.
Right. It definitely, it's the pop culture might be my favorite. My second favorite will be pushing the boundaries of good taste.
Mm-hmm.
The Gerber era, and probably a little bit of the political satire. If you noticed in the beginning when they were doing those, it's still topical today.
Yeah.
What's going on with universities and free speech and everything. It's pretty topical. It's funny. None of that stuff ever goes away.
Yeah, well, they had those.
But,
they had the broad target of Nixon and his crew, to sling an arrow at.
Oh yeah, yeah, it was great. But then like he was saying with Paul Lake, and it kind of fell into what I would describe as vaudeville type humor. It's still stuck in the late '40s, early '50s. Whenever they would try to push it, they would push it, but it wouldn't be quite as funny. If it would have been, if they'd have had some of the younger, more people like Gerber writing it, it probably would have went weird and funny.
Yeah. Well, listeners, if you're, and you bring up an important name here. If you're not familiar with Steve Gerber, he's probably the most biting satirical comic book writer of, if not all time, definitely of his era. Howard the Duck is his creation, and that was built to skewer. His work on the Defenders was built to deconstruct. When Marvel screwed him out of royalties, he went and did Destroy Your Duck. Because he was getting sued left and right. Like Steve Gerber's story is just a story of a man with a vision, like a big overall vision of life and creativity that he needed to get out, and publishers be damned about it. Yeah. So knowing that Steve Gerber was behind this, and not surprised, and awesome, makes me want to read the Steve Gerber stuff.
Well, but the problem with Steve Gerber, and I wished he'd have stayed editor a lot longer, but from doing the Marvel interviews, we talked to quite a few artists that worked with him. Val Merrick, I think, was the one that talked about. We asked him how come or Gerber didn't put out as much or couldn't meet a deadline, and he said, for real, I don't know what his problem was. He said, I kind of think it might have been laziness or the fact that he just liked to think about the stuff, but he didn't realize it's a business and you have to give the artist something to draw. So, which, was a big problem for Marvel when they kept missing deadlines. And as Mark would say, I don't think Crazy ever missed a deadline. Did they, Mark?
No.
Oh, wow.
I will add on to that Steve Gerber thing. He only edited 4 issues, but those 4 issues, any article he had, and Mark can concur with this, is a very verbose guy. So if anything, he wrote too much, and it probably helped him to miss deadlines. And there's that kind of famous issue of Howard the Duck, number 16, where it's all text.
It's
so he liked to write.
Totally.
So,
I like to refer to those when there's Steve Gerber would do one of them. There's a few other some that touch some that grace the pages of Crazy, that when they write a book, those books literally weigh more because there's just more ink on the page.
Yeah. Well, if you see some of the content that was in the issues that he did, I'm trying to keep it, as well. Anyways, one of my favorites was hot dog hookers, which is, I think he was taking, he was making fun of the type of restaurants that had these girls on roller skates who will come out and give you. I guess it was a throwback to the 50s when in the 70s it came back.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things he was doing. I think they were making fun of the men's type of magazines too, like the ones with adventure. And so that was a part of that. Also, what else was there in that one, Mark? It was
Well, they
about
did Stupid Stories Illustrated a few times, and
yes,
and they had Glass Nose in one of them where he had it was like a James Bond guy who had a glass nose.
Oh,
And he's
geez.
like, and it's written kind of in the same kind of pulp like fashion
yes.
of the old pulps,
Yeah. Yeah.
intentionally,
So
the
now, which one of you has do you have, either of you have a complete collection of crazy issues?
I do.
You do.
Yeah.
Is that where so that must be where all the research was done?
Yeah, well,
Um, I have a lot of the ones that are like PDFs,
Yeah.
yeah.
quite a bit of them.
Well,
That
strangely
was
enough,
taken from a
oh, sorry,
website.
sorry to interrupt. Strangely
That's
enough,
okay.
since they are available if you know where to look online,
Hmm.
it helped a lot. So I could just kind of thumb through things online without going to my original copies. Eventually, I did pull out the original box just to
Yeah,
kind of make sure I didn't miss anything, and as good as scanned copies are online, sometimes they miss pages and stuff like that. So I
Yeah.
had to go back to reference the pages they missed. Usually it was an ad page, but sometimes it wasn't. And so, I wanted to make sure because I have an index in the back and I wanted to make sure it was complete. So
Yeah. Your index is like 150 pages, and I'm not kidding.
I don't know how many.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty
It's
thorough.
over 100.
But
Yeah.
there's no
well,
other place to
that's
get an
more.
index like that. I mean, you could go to
I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
I'm saying that's an example of how in depth the research is on this book. It's really, really, really deep. Do you think they'll ever do collected editions of this? I know they did there were a couple years ago they did release a trade, which maybe the best of stuff, but it really focused on the superhero slapstick of
Right.
it. Do you think they'll ever do a complete, say omnibus?
We're all silent. I'll talk.
Yeah, I was like, the answer is no.
I'll say I hope so.
Yeah,
But it's hard to tell because they don't revere Marvel in general doesn't revere their humor stuff as
Yeah,
fondly as everything else. I mean, it took them forever to put a not brand Marvel
yeah,
book out. This I keep saying snafu. Through Fantagraphics, there's going to be a complete snafu, which only lasted 3 issues back in the 50s, because Fantagraphics is doing Atlas compilations. But
oh cool.
there hasn't been too much demand for anything crazy. I don't know how well that 2019 superhero crazy thing did. I don't think it did very well. I think it's already out of print.
I might have just
But I
bought
would,
the
I would
last copy. I mean, seriously, might have
Yeah.
just bought the last copy on Amazon.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if it would be revered enough to reprint everything. That's a lot, and the issues aren't that valuable that you can't just get originals. But I think if somebody was to go through, and Marvel hint hint, and
Yeah,
actually do a comprehensive collection from, of all 94 issues and scale it down to maybe a 200-300 page book and with some articles introducing and saying why it was significant, why they did this, I think that would sell,
yeah, I agree. I think it's because there's, like you said in the beginning, and then at the end, there are so many real comic book luminaries.
Yeah.
Paul
Yeah.
Kupperberg was involved, Tom DeFalco, all these dudes,
yes,
that just really defined the Bronze Age and of comic books, and they're all doing this crazy slapstick stuff when all we know them for is Thor, Mjolnir, Fantastic Four.
Well-
Like Neil Adams. You don't think of Neil Adams as a cartoon guy.
well, was it Tom DeFalco, Mark? Didn't he say that he started out writing humor?
Yeah, he started over at Archie,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, he wanted to branch out into Marvel, and it was hard to get in. So he ironically was the one who started during that Paul Lakin era,
hmm
and he wrote a few articles there, and then of course that branched out to where he wrote. Well, he talks about it. We interviewed him.
yeah.
He
I read.
talks
It was
about
a
in that
great. Yeah, I
book.
read that
Yeah.
one. It was a great interview. Yeah,
He talks about how he got into the other titles and then eventually ran the company for a while. So it's like he did well for himself.
yes, he did.
Which I thought would have been the asking him about how he got to run the company. That would be kind of a sticky question, but he was open about it, and he didn't mind talking about how it came about, which was great.
That was,
And
that was right in the wake of Shooter's dismissal,
yeah,
right? That was yeah.
Yeah.
right. Which the company itself, the guys who ran it, they really didn't want Shooter around anymore.
Yeah.
But also the creators didn't really want him around. And
He's a controversial figure, as we like to
he is.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is. I was surprised that DeFalco was so open about it. And he didn't mind saying that he felt like he was still friends with Shooter,
Mm-hmm.
and felt he owed him a little bit of being able to be an editor and then his assistant and things like that. So that was a really good interview.
Yeah.
There's some other people though who don't get as much praise. Bob McLeod, who wrote
Yes.
the introduction for us. And then Mary Wilshire, she doesn't get,
Yep.
I mean, almost nothing.
Didn't Mary, wasn't she involved in, am I thinking of Power Pack? Didn't she do a lot of Power Pack later on? Or
She probably did.
yeah,
I can't remember.
No.
Yeah, because
I know she did for Red Sonja.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
She did
Yeah.
for
Yep.
Sonja.
Yeah. I was skimming through her section of the
Yeah.
book, and that name sounds, and her work is very clean.
Yeah, it is funny in the book, people that got their start. Another one of the guys started at Crazy was Mike Carlin, and then now he's known for
Yes.
Superman and everything else. And it's like he was so relieved that we were asking about something else other than Superman. It's like, yes, I want to talk about Pedro's stuff and Dirk McGurk, and he was like, yes,
Awesome. Yeah.
it's like stuff that nobody cares about. Another one that went on to greater fame was Bob Camp. He started in the pages of Crazy, and then
Yeah.
he ran Spumco and worked on Ren and Stimpy and all that stuff for a number of years. And, he still has fond memories. We didn't get to interview him directly, but, I know he still has fond memories of working at Crazy. So,
Yeah, he was posting quite a bit of comments on our Facebook page for Crazy, as well as a lot of people in it, when we were posting things, and we'd always get the ones who we didn't get to interview would say, "Oh, I would have loved to have been interviewed."
Yeah.
Well, I sent I don't know, Bob
Yeah.
Camp. He
Check your
got
inboxes.
yeah.
and
But
messages.
if we did interview everyone, this book would probably be twice as big. So it's like a few people had to,
True.
because I used you mentioned back issue. I used archival interviews from that I had interviewed people, and I also did a 2-volume cracked volume 15 years ago. So
Yeah.
I fortunately interviewed people like Paul Lake in the past since. So, and I had the foresight to ask him questions about Crazy back then. So it was appropriate for this book. So,
Oh, that's awesome. So let's dig into both of your writing paths a little bit. How long have you been? Do you call yourselves investigative? Like investigative.
Dateline.
Yeah. Like journalists for investigative fandom journalists, or because I'm looking at both of your bibliographies, and there's a lot of great stuff on here. A lot about history of comedy. Let's see, Mark Arnold. You did the story of the Walt Disney Productions. You written about the Beatles, Cracked. John Severin, Pac-Man, the animated TV show, that really intrigued me. Actually, there's a whole book about that. And Mark Slade, you've done some stuff. You've done Howling After Midnight, Screaming Eye Presents, which is a graphic novel. We're going to talk about that later. You've got a book out called The Marvelous Bronze Age: Conversation with Marvel Creators of the 70s. So it seems like we go from Slade, you come from more of a fiction, like a narrative fiction background. And Mark, you've kind of got a little bit of Arnold, you've got a little bit of a investigative fandom journalism background.
Yeah. Well, mine has kind of a humorous bent behind it. And basically, a lot of it comes out of the fact, like one of the things I love, if I do any book, including the Crazy book, if I find out some information or fact about Crazy or anything else that I didn't know about, and it's not written about anywhere else. If Tom DeFalco or Mike Carlin says something in an interview, and we're the first ones to uncover it, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It just gives you new, information, about something that you thought might have been this way, and now you know it to be this. And I've had that happen on a number of my books. So.
Right. Well, for me, as far as going for nonfiction and looking into all this, I just really wanted to learn. Uh, the two things, if I was going to do nonfiction, the two subjects was Marvel and figuring out was there really a bullpen and did they actually get along?
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to do a book on Crazy Magazine. So I don't have to know everything to do a book.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the least I know about something, the more it's going to make me want to find out. And
That's wonderful.
that's what kept me going on both of those. And yeah, as far as the fiction, it's just I never thought I would ever get a chance to do a book like this. To be honest,
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, how did you two link up to do Crazy then? How did the
I had
paths
sent
cross?
I had sent an email to Ben Omart at Bear Manor because he had already published the Marvel book. And
Which let me interject real quick, listeners. We're talking about Bear Manor Media. You go to bearmanormedia.com, and that's the best place for you to pick up Crazy. It's directly from their publisher. Of course, Crazy, the magazine that dared to be dumb, the book.
Yeah. Yes. And so I sent him an email. And at the time, Chauncey and Lothar, who helped me write the Marvel book, sort of wanted to do it, but not really. So I sent him an email and I described what and he was like, "Oh, that would be great." But it's funny. I just had an email from a guy named Mark Arnold. And I go, "Huh, that name sounds familiar." I hadn't realized we were both Facebook friends. Somehow we became Facebook friends.
Right.
And
Yeah.
had never actually spoken to each other or any of that. And so he said, "Well, maybe you guys can collaborate." And I said, "Well, if Mark wants to do it, I'd be glad to stand back and let him do it." He said, "Oh no, Mark loves to collaborate," and it turned out he did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's really neat.
I don't mind collaborating if somebody I can get along with. I'll put it that way. But
You two seem to get along well.
Yeah.
So how long ago was that then? When is that? Like how long? I guess how long did this book take to germinate and come to fruition?
It was pretty quick, actually. Yeah.
Oh, so you guys have you just recently started dating then?
Yeah. I mean, my history behind it, I'd already said that I love the humor books, but I never thought I would write books about them.
Yeah.
Because I figured that was like my private obsession. Somewhere along the line, my first book at Bear Manor was created and produced by Total Television, and they were the animation studio behind Underdog and Tennessee Tuxedo, and that was back in 2009. And Ben Omart, the publisher, said, "Well, what do you want to write on now?" And I go, "I don't know, And it's like somewhere along the line I had said because of eBay, I had acquired every issue of Cracked because it used to be they were impossible to find, but once eBay came in, this is the wild, wild west days where people would just say, "Stack of magazines, 50 cents,"
Yep.
It's like,
those are the glory days of eBay. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I would buy these things and I go, "Wow, I got the entire collection." So I was kind of bragging about it because it's like nobody has an entire collection of Cracked. And then he says, "Why don't you write a history on Cracked?" And I honestly said, "Does anyone really care?"
Oh.
And I put a few notes out on Facebook and stuff like that. This is about 2009, 10, whatever. And it turns out people did care.
Yeah.
And not only the fans, the creators did. And so I got in touch with everybody. And then that's where the Cracked book came from. And that became a 2-volume set because Cracked was more, published for 40 years. And so it's longer than Crazy.
And that's if you're Cracked, you're happy.
Right. And that one has an index too, which is why it's so thick and thorough and everything like that. Then afterwards, and Ben always denies that he ever said this, but he did it many times. He said, "Well, now that you did Crack, let's do a Mad book." And I didn't want to do because there had been other Mad history books. I felt that they were really good. And I said, "What can I bring to the table?" I really don't like doing books on subjects that other people had done. But then that was about 2011. But by 2020, I guess, 2019, somewhere around there, it was before the pandemic, I finally said, enough time's passed. Mad's going into reprints. This might be a good time to do it. And I realized any history of Mad only went up to the early 90s. So I know people only care about the early years typically, but it's like I wanted to find out what happened in the later years, why they moved to LA, why they went to reprint, blah, 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 blah. And so I did more interviews and I finally agreed to do the book, but that took like 5 years
Hmm.
and that one I did by myself. So this is why I didn't mind having a co-writer. But then
Well,
I
that
fit.
book's got a great title, by the way.
Oh,
A very, very subtly, very funny title. It's called Unconditionally Mad, Part 1 and Part B.
Right. Well, if you go back to If You're Cracked, You're Happy, I have Volume 1, WON, Volume 2, TOO.
That's
So,
true, you
yeah,
do. That's
yeah.
true.
I tried to inject a little humor in this stuff, and I hope we did in the Crazy book too. But when it got to doing the Mad book, at that point, I had thought about doing a Crazy book over the years because it was my love
Yeah.
of all the humor magazines. But I figured, it's not that high priority. But once I did the Mad book, I said, well, you got to complete the trilogy. It's like,
You have to.
you have to do the Return of the Jedi. So it's like, here we are. And, at first, Ben told me, well, this guy named Mark Slade and these other guys are wanting to do it. And I go, wow, that's a lot of authors on this. I think it was best that it just got down to Mark.
Yeah.
No offense to the other guys, Chauncey and,
No, no.
Sometimes too many cooks.
yeah. I just figured I had a vision of what I wanted to do. Mark had a vision of what he wanted to do, and it seemed to work because I had always wanted to incorporate stuff that I'd worked on at back issue and do the index. That was my main contribution. I think Mark, you wanted to do like basically reviews of those classic 14 issues and a few
Right.
others, and that's where you wrote the majority of it. I mean, we did cross paths on different
Yes.
things. Like I actually got a letter produced in the magazine somewhere along the lines in issue 57. So I wanted to write about that because
That's awesome.
it was, I'm no letter hack, but that was actually, and I didn't even remember that it happened back at the time. I found out a few years later. I go, son of a gun, I got a letter published at Crazy.
One of the fun things I like to do on the show when we read the old books is I like to call out the people who were the letter hacks. And I'm like, if you're hearing this, please reach out. Because I want to know, like, 30 years, 40 years later, what happened to Lone Wolf, what happened to this
and
guy.
I was never a letter hack because I was one who wanted a personal response. And when I got like no response, or if I got like a pre-printed form letter, thank you, Charles M. Schultz thanks you for your time, here's a picture of Snoopy, I was like, I want him to write to me personally. That's how I gave up being a letter hack, but somehow I had written a letter to Crazy, possibly because I never got a letter published in Mad, and I know I wrote to them about a dozen times, nothing. And Crazy, I probably just dashed off a letter, and it got published, and I know I didn't notice it at the time. It was a couple years later when I was reflipping through the issue, and I go, hey, that's me, because there's no other Mark Arnold, Saratoga, California. And I also remember what I wrote, which was I was asking about Crazy paperbacks because Mad had paperbacks.
Yeah. Well, did they ever do any like smaller reprints of those, or did they just keep them in the magazine formats?
The closest is they did that Crazy anthology that came out a few years back that we were talking about. That's a paperback, arguably. And then in the early issues, Bob Foster, who's recently passed away, he did the history and evolution of moose kind, and Fantagraphics compiled all those moose kinds into one paperback volume. So, but as far as a little pocket-sized edition of Crazy, never.
Matt, Crazy skewers the movies, kind of a thing.
And all the other humor magazines had at least one or two paperbacks. Somewhere along the line. It's just Crazy never did one. So.
Really, wow! It is, it's wild. It's a really wild time for Marvel. Just trying different stuff, seeing what fit, using the same roster of talent. It's really cool.
About that, the roster of talent, Marv Wolfman said in the beginning he wasn't allowed to get the talent from Marvel. He had to go and search.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is why you had some different kinds of people in the beginning, like the artist Robert Graysmith. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah, I know the name.
Well, he wrote a whole ton of books about the Oh man, what's a serial killer, Mark?
Zodiac killer.
Oh,
Zodiac.
that's
Yeah.
actually how I know the name. Yes. I've gone down the Zodiac Killer rabbit hole. Yes,
Exactly.
that is
And
100% how I know that name.
and so Marv Wolfman, I asked him.
Oh,
That was one of the questions I asked him. Did you know about him? And he says, no. What was his connection? And I think he was wondering, is he the Zodiac? And
No.
no,
wait, yeah, so he's the cartoonist in the movie that's
yeah,
Jake Gyllenhaal. So
yes,
he drew on Crazy?
Yeah.
yes, he did.
Oh,
Yeah.
wild. Oh. Well, hold on. Just to jump in there. They just did a documentary thing where they pretty much identified who the Zodiac Killer was.
Yeah.
I think it's on
Do you
HBO.
really believe
Yeah,
that?
like it's the family, some brothers and sisters who's some stepdadish type guy in their family. They pretty much,
Yes.
yeah, it's pretty much identified it was him, and that's the same guy that Fincher fingers in the movie Zodiac.
Yes, that's
It's crazy. So he
Yes.
worked on Crazy.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's
During the
awesome.
good era too, during the Wolfman
yeah.
I can't wait to
and,
check that out then. That's
Gerber
amazing.
eras. So
Yeah.
yeah, he was in there doing funny comedy. Gerber wrote
In the
this series
background of
called,
every panel, it's a guy in the black hood with the
right.
weird,
Yeah,
the
Gerber
weird
did
symbol
this.
on him.
Gerber did this series called Just Plain Folks, which is actually a pretty funny series. It only lasts a few entries, but enough, that it's good, solid reading. Again, it's like a book,
Yeah,
but
yeah, sure.
Graysmith's art of these Just Plain Folks just kind of bring it to life,
Yeah.
because they're really extreme drawings, kind of like a Basil Wolverton type
Oh.
that way,
Awesome. Awesome. I think you guys included a Basil Wolverton. I believe it was a house ad or something.
It
With
was
all
an
the
article.
intestines spilled out or something.
No, it was an article written by Harlan Ellison,
Oh,
which is
that's
another
Harlan Ellison. Yeah, that
And
was it. I love Harlan
we
Ellison.
we found out since, but this will give a plug for our next book. We found out since that drawing that Basil had done was already produced for the series of posters for Topps, like bubblegum,
Oh, okay.
in the 60s. So we thought it was an original piece of art, and I think Marv Wolfman did too, but we found out it was from that. So we're doing a plop book for
Oh,
is our
yeah,
next
Plop is
project.
great. Yes.
So we talked to Monty Wolverton already, and we have that information. So we're going to add that in the plop book, saying we didn't know this when we did our crazy book, but here we go.
That's so cool. Yeah, I forgot Harlan Ellison was involved in this too. And Basil Wolverton's amazing. So listeners, you need to be on the lookout for the plot book. You need to check out Crazy, the magazine that dared to be dumb. Celebrate the Mark Arnold, Mark Slade. You guys did a really, really, really solid piece here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. Is there one kind of like the state of comedy comic books today? Or comedy, printed comedy, we'll say. What are both your final thoughts on that, and what do you think the future is for that? Printed magazine / comic book comedy satire.
I'll say that it'll come back. I do. I believe people are tired of not being able to express themselves, and especially comedians. That's just the way their DNA is, to push things. And then there's some who are like Lakin, who never really pushed it. It was fine. The parodies in the Lakin era were not bad at all.
Mhm.
They just weren't quite as funny as what they became with Hama and what they were with Wolfman and Gerber. But I think comedy itself will make a comeback. It's already coming back with Shane Gillis, who's doing all kinds of crazy stuff and pushing. And I think so. I think maybe it won't be printed. It'll probably be online.
That's my thing. Yeah, printed. Yeah, or at least illustrated. We'll say that.
Yeah.
It'll be illustrated.
We'll say printed / illustrated. Do you think it's Shane Gillis? Does Shane do comedy cartoon or
No,
strip
he
stuff?
does like SCTV and Saturday Night Live. He was actually a cast member of Saturday Night Live and was fired 2 days later for saying.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I'm thinking like printed comedy like that.
Well, no,
Yeah.
it'll come back. It'll come back.
Yeah.
Hardy independents who are doing that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
You know,
mean, I can mention a couple. Mad is actually starting to print more new material,
Are they?
which is, yeah, their newest issue just came out. They did issue 40 a couple months ago, which had political humor that some of it was new, and then the newest issue they decided, yeah, enough time has passed. We should continue to do some new material. So the
Mhm.
newest issue has a brand new Spy versus Spy by Peter Cooper and a new Sergio Aragonés article,
Oh,
among other
awesome.
things. So,
Awesome.
so I mean,
Love
they're
Sergio.
slowly coming back.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like I hope it comes back to the glory days, but who knows? But it would be nice to have. I mean, I have a friend who publishes a magazine called Freaky. I'll give a shout out for
Sure.
that. There's this one that's more right wing called Flip City that's out there, but I still subscribe to it. Believe it or not, after all these years, Harvard still publishes the Harvard Lampoon.
Oh, they do. Okay.
So there are humor magazines out there, but it's like it's not like in the heyday of the 70s or 60s where you had, Mad, Crazy Sick. Well, Crazy was 70s, but Mad, Crack, Crazy Sick, and National Lampoon and things like that, all running concurrently and putting out annuals and
Yeah,
specials and movies and
just
all that.
being folded crazy, folded in
Yeah,
your back pocket,
right.
carried with
But
you in school,
I could
hidden
see
in the books, hidden in your math textbook.
I could see something coming back. I mean, I go scouring the new releases and sometimes actually buy them over at the comic store. They're doing like Young Batman now at DC,
Oh
and it's
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of things like that. They're doing a new line of EC comics with oddball titles like Epitaphs of the,
Oh, great. Oh,
yeah,
I didn't know they
and
were bringing EC back. That's great.
yes, and let's see, what else have I seen? There's kids comics that didn't exist when I was a kid. Like there's a Sesame Street comic book now. It's actually kind of funny. So, there is room for humor. And Sergio, we mentioned him. He's still doing Gru.
He's
Yeah,
always great. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and
Always.
he doesn't do it every month, but he does it like about 7, 8 issues a year.
He's got to give that
Something like
He's
that.
got to give that
Yeah.
mustache a rest sometime.
Yeah, and I did get an interview with him for the plot book. It was a
Yeah,
wonderful interview. So, I was worried because, there's certain people on these books you just want to get, and it's like you can't have a book without so and so unless they've passed. But if they're still around and they
yeah.
still have their wits, you want to get them for the book. So,
Totally, totally.
yeah, yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic interview. Thank you both so very much, Marks Arnold and Slade. Seek them out. Yeah, they have Facebook pages. You can find them on Facebook. Definitely seek this book out. Crazy, the magazine that dared to be dumb. Go to bearmanormedia.com. It's been out for a few months. You're hearing this post Christmas, so it makes a great Arbor Day gift.
might be a great Valentine's Day. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're on the left coast anytime around April, I'm going to be at the what's it called, the mid state comic convention in the early part of April.
Oh, great. What city is that in?
It's going to be Salem, Oregon. So
Salem, Oregon. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And
Fantastic.
so I have copies there for sale and to sign, things like that. So.
Help support these guys. This is an era of comics that I know this is Joe on Joe, right? So, but this is an era that produced the dudes that made the GI Joe that we love. Really is. I mean, Larry.
GI Joe.
Yeah. I mean, Larry came out of this, and Larry brought a lot of this. His adept skill at crafting comic books, came from this era and these people, and it's very evident in the Joe work that he did. And so I love exploring stuff that Larry worked on, outside of G.I. Joe, but pre and post and everything. So this was really great to have you both on. I did one thing before we let you go. Mark Arnold, I have to say this. I was thinking, I'll just catch him after the interview, but I need to get this on air. You did Headquarter to Timeline of the Monkees solo years. I'm a massive Monkees fan. I adore the Monkees. Same. Like, how was that working on a Monkees book? Is that a passion project, or was that someone like, Mark, I need a Monkees book. Churn me out one.
I had done a Beatles book years ago called Mark Arnold Picks on the Beatles, and it was kind of a vanity thing. That one I published myself. And it was just to see if I could do my own reviews on the Beatles. And a friend of mine named Ventrella, that he was my co-author in the Monkeys books. He says, "You want to do one on the Monkeys?" And I kind of said, "I don't know. I like the Monkeys, but I didn't think, that anybody would care."
Mm-hmm.
But he put it to me. It says, "Well, it would be more fun to do the Monkeys songs like you did the Beatles thing with two voices critiquing it. Then it would be kind of like a Siskel and Ebert type thing." And so I said, "All right, that sounds encouraging. Sounds fun." And a lot of times we agree, sometimes we don't, and it just kind of makes for fun. But we try to keep factual. The first book was called Long Title, and it does have a long title. Basically shows the progression of songs chronologically as they were composed more than they were released, because they kept stuff in the vault and stuff like that.
Sure.
So, and then we revised it recently because it didn't have the Christmas album and the more recent stuff. So, now
which is a great album.
What we consider complete.
Yep.
We were originally going to put all the solo stuff in the book, but it was just getting too big. So we shelved that. And then Ben, in his usual way, is like, "This book was great. Can you do another one?" And it's like, well, and at least I had all this information about the solo stuff, not complete. We had to write more.
Yeah.
But Mike wasn't as enthused about it, but then he got enthused about it over time because he had never really explored the solo stuff.
Right.
And I think at this point, if you're a true Monkees fan, you should explore the solo stuff just as much as the group stuff, because
Absolutely.
most of it is of the same quality. It's just one singer instead of all four or whatever,
Their story is fascinating. I've been a Monkees fan since I was a child. I actually saw Mike at his last performance here. He passed away like 2 days after we saw him at the Greek Theater here in LA. So that's okay. Well, I wanted to get that on air. So listeners, if there's any Monkees fans like me out there, there's 2 great Monkees books all go check out. So Mark Arnold, Mark Slade, thank you both so very much for joining us on Joe on Joe today.
Thank you.
All right, listeners. Well, now you're crazy. Being crazy is half the battle.